Hello everyone, and welcome to Gallery Bytes. My name is Houghton Kinsman, and I'm the Adult Education Coordinator here at the Crocker. My partner in crime today is...
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm a graphic designer here at the museum.
Cool, and behind the camera we have Associate Director of Education, Mallory Marsh, who will be checking the chat and letting us know if you have any comments or questions in there. Hi Mallory.
Hi everybody, thanks for being here today.
So, Brian, how are you today?
Good, it's fun to be here and like nerd out about design.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about chairs recently, right?
That's right. A lot of effort in preparation for this, but it was also kind of fun.
Yeah.
It was like what I do in my free time.
Yeah. It's been pretty funny geeking out with you over the last few weeks. Yeah. But we sort of set up here in 231. We're giving everybody a sort of behind the scenes look at Gallery Bytes today. But we've also been talking a lot about how the work that you do in marketing and the work that I do in education is like sort of inherently creative, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today. So why don't you kick us off by telling us what you do here all day?
Yeah, so I make a lot of things that people probably don't really realize are designed because they interact with them on the mundane level. So like if you're going to go see the Monet de Matisse exhibition that's up right now, the first thing you'll encounter is the title wall, and I was the person who, put the layout together and like designed the graphics for that. If you get postcards in the mail, I'm often the person who makes those. There's a second designer, not in the room with us today, that does a lot of work too, including Art Letter and Art Interactive. I also take a lot of photography, so sometimes when you're looking at Art Letter, you'll see the photos I've taken of artwork. I make a lot of video for the museum, and in the case of this program, I help out a lot with getting technology problems sorted, which is why you see all these gizmos here, including an iPad, this crazy little NASA-looking switcher here, and this monitor, which you have the back of, but for us, Houghton and I see a picture of ourselves as well as some other things regarding the microphones and stuff.
I mean, you taught me a lot about how to use all this equipment, and you've given me a pretty steep task here today, Brian, like to multitask, facilitate this conversation, switch the camera views.
Yeah.
So I hope I'm prepped and ready for it. We probably won't be that active in the chat, just because, I mean, there's only so many things I can do at one time. But please send us your questions and comments. Mallory is checking those, and we'll answer them as they come up. But, I mean, you mentioned photography early on, Brian, and I love that you did, because I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but we had done a program for the Todd Shaw exhibition that we had here, where I interviewed the curator and curator of education at the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art. And we had worked sort of with Virginia Mocha on the High Fructose exhibition. And one of the installation shots I showed from the exhibition was the Mark Dean Wecker installation, a photograph that's taken by yours truly, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to pull it up real quick, and we can chat a little bit about it.
Yeah, this was a fun show. If any of you remember it, it was this phantasmagoria of color, and it was like an acid trip. And one of the neat things about this was if you came here while this is being installed, it's one of the rare chances that you actually get to see an artist making the piece that goes into the show. So Martin Vecca was here for at least a week or two, painting the floor, or painting the walls. The floor was installed later, and it was just a cool experience. And then he did it again later with the hallway that we have still up right now. But in regarding to this program, the thing that's neat about this photo to me is that it's full of 3 beanbag chairs, which are like, they're iconic designs. These are from the 60s, one of the first beanbag chairs made. And they're an example of like things that you might have not really thought too much about when they were there because you were looking at the artwork. But they were designed that really fit in with the spirit of this show. I think kind of make the show more interesting when you know that these come from that time period, that they're the originals. These are like special like icons of design, and even have a special way of being stuffed.
Yeah.
And,
let me zoom in on those real quick.
They're trickier than it looks to get into that position. Yeah. There's a way that you're supposed to do it that I watched and I couldn't really figure it
Okay.
out. And sometimes I tried to do it and I just gave up. But yeah, they're supposed to have, they have a little back to them and
Yeah.
seated a certain way. But they're cool. Like
Yeah.
it's a neat. It was a neat thing to add to the show.
We're going to be talking a lot about chairs and about interior spaces over the next 20 to 30 minutes. But before we get there, we've spoken recently about sort of the marketing design philosophy, and you had a really cool sort of example that you wanted to show us between the Crocker logo and the architecture of this building that we currently occupy.
Right. So when I talk about like that I work on a lot of mundane things, probably the most mundane of all might be this logo that you all have seen hundreds of times. Whenever you encounter one of our products, you see it outside the building. When you walk in, it's the Crocker logo, and it's sitting right here. The neat thing about this is that first, there's a story behind it, which is that it's made with the typeface Futura. And this big fat book here is all about that. So if you're a type nerd, it won't surprise you that there's a book written about a single typeface. But it was made in the 1920s. And one of the reasons why it's so useful for me as a designer is because it fits in with almost any type of product we have to make. So again, like if you go to the Monet de Matisse exhibition, you'll see that typeface on the text of the body text of the title wall. But then if you're here at the High Fructose exhibition, which is a lot of street art and things that are made today, it still fits in. It looks like it's completely in place, no matter if it was 100 years ago or today. So it's really versatile typeface. In terms of the building, it fits in. It's like modernistic. It's very geometric. And so there are a lot of nice reasons why we use this typeface so often. I work with it every single day. But there's a cool Easter egg that you might not have realized unless you took a really hard peek at this.
I'll zoom in.
Yeah, and if you zoom in on the Words Art Museum, you'll see that the ascenders, which are the little stems at the top of the A and the R and the T, they're not completely horizontal, but they have a little slash in them. And if you know anything about the building we have, the skylights of the roof create this sawtooth effect. And so that was a deliberate choice by the designer to like give us a little customization, and it's something that we've carried through with all of our collateral today. Like pay attention when you're getting products from us, because you'll see often like a diagonal that we use as a motif to make it feel a little bit more like a Crocker brand.
Yeah, I mean that sort of example that you gave us makes me think a lot about the way that we work in education, whether it be public programs or a studio experience or school and teacher programs. That I think these acts of creating these programs or educational initiatives are in and of themselves creative, right? And it kind of connects to this design process, right? We ideate, we design, we prototype, we test, and then we refine. Gallery Bytes is a good example of that. We constantly reworking things, like reassessing, adding elements, subtracting elements. Speaking of pictures, I keep a picture of Dieter Rams and Joseph Beuys teaching on the wall at my cubicle, so I'll just pull it up real quick. Just as a reminder that, design is not only just sort of a graphic design poster, or, art is not just a painting on the wall. Joseph Beuys once said that to teach is my greatest work of art, and so I'm constantly thinking about that. And we'll kind of discuss Dieter Rams' 10 principles of design a little bit later on in the program. But let's get back to the building. We're sitting in 231. You see this wonderful curved wall behind us, which is like a very signature feature of Gwathmey and Siegel. But you were here when the building was getting built and like getting ready to unveil, and you did a lot of photographing at the time, right? Don't you have a Tebow story for us or something?
So as a lot of people who try to get into the museum world, I spent many years volunteering here, and my job was as a photography volunteer, so I attended a lot of events and took pictures for the marketing department. But one of the cool things I got to do was tour this building when it was still under construction. And so I photographed at one point a tour that we were giving to Wayne Tebow, which is neat in and of itself. But we walked up to the third floor galleries, the contemporary wing, pretty much right above here, and Thibaut stopped to look over at the I-5 overpass here, looking out the window, and he stopped and he goes, quite a view, isn't it?
Yeah. That must have been a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, it was neat because it's like, this is what a great artist to be, hanging around with, even just taking pictures, but also kind of a cool experience that, like, when you're at an art museum, sometimes you never know, like, if there's a little tidbit that you can grab out of an experience that is otherwise kind of ordinary.
Yeah. I mean, the tidbit that I took away from that story is sort of a reminder of how, like, artists, architects, and designers are very often looking at the everyday for inspiration, but also trying to see it in a new way, through a new lens, from a different perspective, right? Whether that be, to inform an intervention, to make you see the world differently. I mean, that example of Thibaut looking at that freeway, I mean, it sort of changes the way that you think about that particular space, right? And going back to the Ram's principles, I think that's really important to consider. But I did want to give everybody at home a little bit of background information about Gwathmey and Siegel, although I'm not going to give you the architecture tour that our Crocker docents do so well. If you're interested in a really in-depth discussion about the building and its relationship to the historic wing, please sign up for one of those architecture tours at the museum. But Gwathmey and Siegel were sort of part of a group of artists known as the New York Five, which included Richard Meyer, John Haydock, Peter Eisenman, and Michael Graves. Brian, I got a Michael Graves surprise for you in a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, they were sort of, I mean, collectively nicknamed the Whites because, I mean, many of their buildings had this sort of white facade, whether it be painted white or these white tiles we'll see in some of the images I'm going to pull up soon. That sort of architectural element. Some of the things that they were really interested in exploring were sort of the spatial and geometric complexity. So when you think about the Crocker building, you see these very cylindrical shapes, sort of sweeping curves, but the rejection of ornamentation, the outside of the building, outside of the materiality of the architectural elements, there's not much ornamentation. And then the transparency and ambiguity. A good example is the Friedman Court, how it looks out onto the historic wing. So that sort of transparent membrane which kind of links the interior and exterior spaces.
One of my favorite tidbits, because I like to relate everything back to Seinfeld, is that if you know George Costanza always pretended to be an architect, and there's a scene where at one point they're asking him, like, oh, well, what stuff have you worked on? And he says, the new addition to the Guggenheim? And that was a Gwathmey Siegel project, actually, which sort of makes it even funnier that he chose like one of the most preeminent firms to pretend to have done work for.
So I'm going to pull up the Crocker building, which I'm sure you're all pretty familiar with. But that's probably one of the more iconic images of the museum. And you can see, those geometric and sort of cylinder volumes on the space. So cut back here and then switch out to the Weeborg space. I love this view. And that's sort of the transparent membrane, right, that we were talking about. Right. And then we shift across, we can see the Getty Museum, designed by Richard Meyer. You can see the white facade, and once again that sort of very curved architectural focal point. And then this is another view of the, it's kind of hard to distinguish, right, between the Crocker sometimes and this building.
Yeah, if you didn't know better, it looks like you're looking at the Crocker Art Museum.
And seeing that Mallory's in the room, she has a really fun story about visiting the High Museum in Atlanta and wondering if she was visiting the Crocker, because that's a Richard Meyer design building. And then this is a Michael Graves model, because one of the other things, connecting back to the nickname, sort of the models that they created were also very often white. So I know we sure do like talking about quotidian things, Brian. We've had a lot of fun talking about sneakers, fashion, but we're going to start talking about chairs now.
I'm glad you brought up chairs, Houghton. We have a question in the chat. Of the two chairs you're sitting in, which is more comfortable?
Ooh.
That's a good point, and we're actually going to get a little bit into that and talk about what that means. But It's an easy answer. This one by far is the most comfortable to sit in. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about why in a second.
Yeah. So do you want to take us away? We've got the Aeron chair and the Toledo chair, right?
Yeah. Didn't you say you had a surprise for me?
Oh, that is true, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Almost forgot that multitasking thing, right? So I really wished I could have like the full Michael Graves experience, have a Michael Graves designed house, but you know, Brian, I'm an educator, so I have to be realistic, right? But I do own this. This is Michael Graves for Target. This fits an educator's salary.
Yeah.
What do you think of my cookie jar?
Well, let me take a look at this thing. Yeah, my educator's salary. There's no cookies in it either. Okay. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that along.
And then the other thing, seeing as I brought the cookie jar, I thought I would also bring along this just to show that, Brian, I too have big books.
Yeah. This is it's bigger than one of these, but not as big as both.
Yeah, I think you have me beat, even though that Rem Kool house is pretty large.
It's a nice book though. Yeah.
But I mean, all jokes aside, the reason I brought those two objects was, I mean, kind of connected to what we wanted to talk about with these chairs in particular, was that architects, you know, not only are designing buildings, but very often they're connected to the design of interior spaces. They may be designing appliances and even furniture, right? And you're going to discuss a little bit about the relationship between architects and furniture.
Yeah. So it's cool that you brought that because architects for a long time have seen chairs as like a prime example of like, how can I flex my architectural genius? Well, I could do that by, if I can make a brand new chair, that shows that I really understand what I'm doing. Because in chairs there are many ways like a nice little miniature of what a building is. It's a 3D form that a human has to interact with. So when someone asks like, well, what's the most comfortable chair? So these are two mundane objects that we brought today because they're sort of fundamental to the Crocker experience. This one that I'm sitting in is fundamental to the staff experience. Might also be fundamental to anyone watching if they've been in an office in the last 20 or 30 years. This chair is designed by Herman Miller, and my microphone just popped out of my pants. It's a mundane object. You might not really think much about it if you sit in it every day, but it's really a masterpiece of, you're bringing up Dieter Rams' 10 Principles of Design. This hits a lot of them. So Dieter Rams, if anyone doesn't know, he is a very influential figure in industrial design. He created lots of products for Braun in the 20th century. Things like radios and electric shavers and things. And when you see an iPod or an iPhone today, that's a direct descendant of the work that he did. So a lot of his design principles centered around like, well, what makes a product good or bad? And things like honesty, durability. Can you look at an object and decide what you're going to do with it? So this chair here, like I said, is a masterpiece of a lot of these things. It's honest because this thing's made of plastic, and it doesn't hide that it's made of plastic. It doesn't try to pretend it's something else by putting fake veneers around it. And it is environmentally friendly. A lot of these things are made from recycled plastics, and I can break this chair down if I wanted to, throw it in the recycle bin, and continue the cycle of that. So it has a lot of meaning behind it when you realize that this chair is designed for a purpose, which is to sit and do your tasks and kind of ignore the chair actually. And focus on what you're working on.
We've got a picture of it in an office setting, and I have to ask, Brian, is this your home office?
Yeah, it is actually. That's the designer salary is much different than the educator one. I'm considering a remodel soon, though.
I don't see any guitars in the background. Okay, so I mean that's the Aeron chair.
Yeah, and so. Houghton, if you don't mind, you can stand up for a second.
We're really going to do this? Okay. We rehearsed this, but I didn't know we were going to do this.
We did. We're actually going to do it. This chair is another mundane object that you've probably encountered. It's in the Crocker Cafe in the Friedman Court. And it's a nice contrast between the Aeron chair because they both are functions of good design, but for completely different reasons. Whereas this chair is meant for like sitting in it for 10 hours and doing a project. This one was designed by Jorge Pensi in the 1970s to be a cafe chair. It started as a chair in Spain. Yeah. And its design is all metal, and the reason is it's outside. So you need something that's durable, that's going to last, and to be stackable. You can't stack a chair like this if you have 300 of them, but I can take this if I own a cafe and put them up and close up for the night. And kind of a neat thing about this is you see the slats are designed to, one, let the water drain if it's raining outside, so the seat doesn't clog up with water. And it's inspired by samurai armor, which I think is just another cool Easter egg.
Yeah, pretty neat, yeah. Are you done discussing?
Yeah, you know, seat.
Okay,
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brian. I mean, hearing you talk about the Toledo chair reminds me of the observation that you had a couple of weeks ago downstairs in the Friedman Court. I mean, you'll tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, stand up for a second because there's something kind of cool about the sunlight that's coming through here. So anyone who comes to the museum, maybe in the late morning or early afternoon, will see what's happening here with the chair, which is that the light hits off of it and it sort of glistens. And I don't know, I've always liked that it gives that effect. Especially downstairs, there's a grid of windows and it creates sort of a neat pattern on the floor. And it also harmonizes with the Jennifer Bartlett Pacific Ocean painting because it looks like water glistening with sunlight. You know, and that's a function of what this chair is made of, its materials. If this were designed with plastic, it wouldn't have the same effect at all.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right.
Yeah, you can have a seat again, sure.
Cool, thank you. That's so kind of you. What I loved about that observation was kind of like if the material was any different, the experience of this chair would be completely different, right? The way it resonated with you would be different. And I often think, like with art, that art, we understand it to have some type of emotional resonance, that it speaks to you in some type of way. But I think design too functions that way. You know, I don't have a story about a chair, but I do have a story about this office space. You know, I came here in 2015 for master's research, and I was observing some studio programs with Emma Moore. And she brought me into the offices to kind of show me around and introduce me to some of the people at the museum. And I remember coming through those big, thick, heavy office doors into this office space and immediately felt like I had been here before, like I understood this place. I hadn't done a lot of research before I came to the museum. I knew about the education department, but nothing about the building. And at the end of the day, Emma mentioned that the building had been designed by Gwathmey and Siegel. And that just really struck home with me because I'd worked at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Miami. It was also a Gwathmey and Siegel building. They had a very similar feel, in the interior spaces. So that resonance through the design of the gray shelving units, the cubicle that I now occupy, which I'll pull up a picture quickly so everybody can see. It kind of reminded me of the way in which art tends to connect with something deeper in you. That design can do that too. Now, we've spoken a lot about sort of quotidian things about design, but I do want to go back to Dieter Rams' 10 principles of good design. And with art, when people make a value judgment, is this good or bad art, sometimes I feel like it misses the point. The more interesting question to me, I think, is like, how does this change the way that you see the world, or how does it change your experience of it? But with design, because it is so functional, do you think it's worth asking what is good design?
Yeah, that's something that you and I talk about a lot, and it's a sort of a fun thing to think about when you do this for a living every day. And these chairs were a good example of how that comes into play. We had someone a few weeks ago on social media say that, I wish these Toledo chairs, they call them a Toledo chair, but they said, I wish the chairs in the cafe were more comfortable so I could work from home. And, I brought up, well, like, what does a good chair mean, and is this a good design or not? And it's often a function of, what is the intent of that design? Who is it made for, and what problem is that trying to solve? And it means that there is no best. There's only a best in the context of that problem. So the Aeron chair, it comes in 3 sizes. If you were to go to buy this from Herman Miller today, they give you this choice of A, B, or C.
Okay.
And that's, if I find 4'10", I'll get the small one, and if I'm 6'9", I'll take the big one. So it fits a lot of different sizes. If I were an NBA player wearing a parka and I came to the Crocker Cafe and sat down, I would probably find that this chair is not very accessible. It's very small. It only fits a narrow range of body types compared to the Aeron. But this chair might also look a little odd downstairs in the cafe. Along with all the other things we said about, like, this wouldn't work for an outdoor seat. It seems like when you look at it as a form, it seems out of place in a cafe. Whereas interestingly, the Toledo chair, it fits in a lot more environments. I feel like you could bring this into a cubicle and it wouldn't seem as out of place as this would be downstairs. So the idea that there is a best is always tied in with, it has to be a part of, like, who is this made for and what problem is it trying to solve.
You raised a point about access in discussing these 2 chairs. I mean, that's another area where you and I kind of work very closely together, right? There's on these ideas of access, whether it's through accessibility services, the size of wall label text, there's a variety of ways in which designers, I mean, in the case of, the education department, programmers are thinking about access. And I mean, these chairs are a good example, right, of, like, I mean, how varied access as a topic and a subject can be, right? Right.
And that's, I think, one reason when we talk about, like, why are architects so fascinated in chairs, it's because there's so many things about the human experience that are tied into this object. It's probably one of the objects of design that we use more than anything else is a chair.
Yeah. I mean, so we've been geeking out about chairs a lot over the last month. We've been getting a lot of stick off Crocker staff for, how we've been geeking out. But we're not that bad, eh, Brian? I mean, Vitra, the Swiss design company, they made a whole documentary about chairs.
Yeah, so Houghton turned me on to a really cool documentary on YouTube by Vitra and the Design Museum. And I'm holding this little miniature that Mallory gave us of a chair because the documentary features a lot of miniatures as well as the real thing. And it's just a neat, if you're interested more in the history of chairs and understanding them as, like, objects to be admired and how they kind of enrich your experience, then you should check it out. We'll put the link down below in the description when we're done with this video.
Sounds good. I mean, sort of to wrap us up, and not to get all meta here, but I mean, that was kind of part of our decision for showing this behind the scenes aspect of Gallery Bytes, right? Like, I mean, when you think about the museum, you come to the Crocker, it's a space, there's artwork on the walls. It feels like sometimes it's a repository for artworks, right? But today museums are a lot different. They are so much more than just artworks hanging on the wall, right? Everything that happens behind the scenes, they're about people, the people that, make programs like Gallery Bytes happen, like our colleagues in development who set up galas for donors and members, education staff, marketing staff to make sure everything gets promoted. It's not just simply artworks on the wall, right? It's so much more than that. And sort of looking behind the scenes, we want to give everybody a sense of that.
Yeah. And I think for me, the noticing is what gives these objects meaning. And the more you notice about things, the more interesting your interactions with those objects can become. So when you know that that this isn't just an office chair, but that it was designed, made by Herman Miller, as a rich history with Eames, and that this chair, came from Spain, or that when you look outside the window now, I think of not just a highway overpass, but there's kind of a Wayne Thiebaud painting with little halos of blue and purple around the road. It makes that experience of looking out the window, which is another mundane thing that we do every day, a little bit more enriching. Yeah. So I like to think about, like, okay, what are the objects in my life that are better because I know the story behind them. And also, you know, like think about, if you're watching this, like what do you have at home that you like more because the object has a story behind it? Yeah. Or maybe what might be more enriching because I need to learn more about that object, you know.
Do you mind if to close this out, do you mind if I quote you?
I would love if you quoted me.
Cool. So according to Brian, this chat was not about the chairs specifically, but rather about the act of noticing. So for you all watching at home, we really encourage you to think differently about something that you encounter on your everyday, during your everyday routine, something that you've never noticed, that you've taken for granted. Stop, take it in, think about it differently, and see how your experience of that changes. Don't forget to join us for the next Gallery Bytes at the end of this month. We hope you enjoyed it. Brian, thank you for joining me. This was fun.
Yeah.
A lot of good work went into this, so I hope you enjoyed it. Take care. Thanks for joining us.